right. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us. I'm really honored to be joined by such a dedicated, passionate group of advocates for survivors generally, and in particular for this legislation. We have our sponsors, Senator Cordell Clear, my senator, represents me, I'm a constituent, and Assemblymember Jeffrey Dinowitz. They are our sponsors for this bill, and we're really grateful to them for their leadership. Sonia Osorio, who we've known for a long time from now, and thankful for her leadership again on this and so many other things. Was our first Deputy Commissioner, Salome Sethi, right there, from the Mayor's Office in Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. We are partners. Many of you, the last time you were here, we're on a panel together, so we are partners in a lot of things. And then Melanie Thompson of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, who's going to share her story as a survivor. And then everyone else, such a diverse coalition together on this issue. I want to be particularly thankful to members of our Special Victims Division Advisory Council who've joined us and who give us advice on matters like this and so many other things. So this is what collaboration looks like: government, community partners, survivors, survivor services groups working together to this end. And the point is very, very simple today. When we give survivors time to report, they come forward. We've seen this time and time again. We saw this when New York eliminated the statute of limitations for rape in 2003. We saw this when the state passed the Child Survivors Act in 2021. And we saw it again late last year when scores of survivors came forward following the enactment of the Adult Survivors Act here in New York State and comparable laws throughout the country. It is long past time to do the same thing for sex trafficking. Sex trafficking, and I shouldn't even have to say this out loud, but I will because it speaks for itself, but it's among the most horrific crimes that we prosecute here at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Severe violence, coercion, manipulation, and control, all in the name of greed. Traffickers prey on the vulnerable, including the young, those with substance use disorders, and people with no or limited resources. It is no wonder that it takes more than 5 years for survivors to report these horrific crimes. We know this for a fact here at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office because multiple survivors have reported crimes to us out of our human trafficking unit that happened too long ago for us to prosecute, including multiple times since many of us gathered to call for this legislation the first time. So think about that. That's the power that the legislature has. So we are gathered again, and hopefully we will see it pass this year. In particular, through our work through the START Act, which enables survivors of sex traffickers to clear their records of crimes committed while under the control of a trafficker. And we thank the Assembly and the Senate for passing that. We hear story after story in our START Act work of horrific crimes that happened years or sometimes decades ago. What happens is we can provide relief to the survivor for their conviction, but what we cannot do, which I think we all should agree on, is we cannot hold accountable the person who was doing the trafficking. Just this year, or just late last year, I should say, we spoke with a woman who was trafficked as a young teen in 2007. She was violently beaten, forced to have sex, and forced to have her trafficker's name tattooed on her body. We could not prosecute that case because of the statute of limitations. We need to change that. Also, late last year, we had another matter with a woman who was sex trafficked less than a decade ago. So we're not talking about things that, a long, long ago, less than a decade ago. And we could not hold her trafficker accountable because of the statute of limitations. We need to change that. So we're here today to say enough is enough. It makes no sense to eliminate the statute of limitations for rape and other serious sex crimes, but not for sex trafficking. We know our legislature makes common sense changes. We've asked them to do other things arising from our practice. We asked them to, again, step in and fix this, pass this simple yet effective legislation that quite simply will allow us at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and prosecutors throughout the state to do our jobs, to hold those who do harm accountable. So with that, Let me turn it over to, as I said, my state senator, Senator Cordell Clear.
Thank you, DA Bragg. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank my good friend and a steadfast partner on this issue, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, Assembly colleague Jeff Dinowitz. Thank you so much for your work on this. Sonia Ansario and of the National Organization of Women and all the other elected officials and advocates, and most importantly, the survivors. And you know, sex trafficking, human trafficking, is a crime that lasts far beyond 5 years. The scars and the damages last a lifetime. In my own district, I got to know a young lady that was trafficked. There was a prosecution in that case, but she could not recover from the damages emotionally and mentally, and ultimately was lured into a situation where she was ultimately murdered. This is the type of thing that there is no statute of limitations for. There is no time limit on that. Sometimes it takes someone 5 years just to come back to their senses, just to be whole again, and then to know and pursue their attackers or their traffickers. So upon election in the Senate, I made it my mission to work to eradicate human trafficking. We've passed meaningful legislation and held community conversations, but there is more to accomplish. One of the first times I had the honor, one of the first issues that I had the honor of collaborating with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg on is ending human trafficking. And we introduced several bills, the most important of which I think we are gathered here for today to talk about. Sadly, we know that at present, due to many variables, effective cases of human trafficking, prosecutors are very challenging. And I should have brought my glasses. I'm gonna borrow yours in a second.
Happy to share.
No, I think I can do it. I just have to hold this up a little bit. But thus far, our bill will empower district attorneys all over the state to be able to effectively prosecute the most heinous and grievous acts of human trafficking. And that way, that will not only hold people accountable, but help change the system. Senate Bill 349B would eliminate the criminal statute of limitations for sex trafficking and extend the window for survivors to file lawsuits to parallel other charges we have recently made, other changes we have made into law. DA Bragg has made the prosecution of traffickers one of his foremost priorities, and to this end, he established the Human Trafficking Response Unit within his office. He and his staff are performing incredible work and now they, along with so many courageous survivors, need our support by passing S 349B. My plan is that we will pass it this year. This time in both houses and with great support from everyone who has joined us here today. I believe this, I believe we can, and I believe that we will. We have to do it for the survivors, and we have to do it for the victims who are out here currently. This brings to mind that we have a great influx of very vulnerable people into our city. And we have to keep in mind that there are predators out there. There are people who are waiting and possibly already taking advantage of them. So we have to protect them, and all the rest of our other citizens are very young men and women, young girls and boys who need our protection. They're vulnerable, they don't have a voice, but we need to speak for them. So thank you. Who am I introducing? No, you.
Our Assembly member.
Okay.
I'm just shifting places here.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz from the Bronx. So,
It's courageous saying the Bronx. Right? You've got some supporters behind you from the Bronx.
actually, it's the Bronx. So, we are in the year 2024. It was sometime, I think, late in 2004, almost 20 years ago, that I first started working on legislation regarding human trafficking, because up until that time, there was no mention of human trafficking in New York law. There was no crime of human trafficking. And you would think it would be a no-brainer that we could pass something really quickly to combat human trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And yet it took a few years, but we finally put together a strong enough coalition to deal with that. And I just want to say right now, having DA Bragg, having Senator Clear, Sonia Osorio, and all these advocates and survivors here is why I'm confident we're going to get the job done this year, 20 years after we started working on this issue. I mean, I'm not a patient person, but this is like way too long. So in 2007, we passed the first anti-human trafficking law. It's called the Anti-Human Trafficking Act of 2007, and it defined what human trafficking was in law. It established penalties for various acts of human trafficking, as well as providing services to survivors of human trafficking. And over the years, we realized we had to strengthen the law, and so bit by bit, that law was strengthened. But right now, we still have more work to do all these years later. And this legislation, I think, is crucial because by eliminating the statute of limitations, criminal statute of limitations, it gives the DAs the ability to go after people who have committed among the most heinous of crimes. It's shocking that right now they can't do that. And, you know, talking to people, advocates, colleagues, just people in general, I found that there's only one group of people that oppose this legislation, and those are the traffickers. Who else would oppose this? So to me, I think this is a no-brainer. I hope that we can get this done as soon as possible this year because people deserve justice.
That's right.
They deserve justice. It's about time we give them the justice. And by eliminating the criminal statute of limitations and by also making changes in terms of civil litigation, as we did with the Adult Survivors Act, as we did with the Child Victims Act, this is the right thing to do, and we have to do it this session. It's only January, I know, but I don't want to wait until the end of June to get this done. This needs to be done right now, and the same line of reasoning applies here as applied when we eliminated the statute of limitations for rape. And the same line of reasoning applies here as it did with the Child Victims Act and the Adult Survivors Act. So we need to do this. We have a great coalition, and I hope that we do the right thing because the people who survived this deserve justice, as do people in the future if they are victims. So I thank everybody for being here, and I look forward to working and make sure this happens ASAP. Thank you.
We're so grateful to have, you know, such strong leaders in the Assembly and the Senate, and we're hoping you're speaking into being that it's going to be this year. It obviously doesn't happen without our legislature, but we also know that without great advocates, bills don't get passed, and we're so honored to have so many great advocates who've been in this space for so long, and Sonia Osorio, who's been a leader on this and so many other issues, will address us now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, DA Bragg, for your leadership, for making this a priority. Thank you, Assemblyman Dinowitz. You are by far the legislature's champion on this year in and year out, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. Senator Cordell, you've come out just knocking it out of the park. You have done so much in this area, and we're so, so grateful. You know, these past couple of days have been really cold. I want you to know that last night, women and girls stood on the street during the coldest, darkest hours, selling sex to strangers. Their pimps didn't let them come in from the street until they'd made the amount of money that they had set for them. And it will happen again tonight in prostitution zones across the city. That is the reality that we are talking about. It reminds me of a case from last year. About this same time last year, actually on Christmas, there was a newly minted 16-year-old Kansas City runaway standing in frigid weather being prostituted. How did she get there? The teenager met a guy online who gave her attention, listened to her, made her feel special, and convinced her to come to New York. Diamond Stewart. The same day she arrived, he put her out on the Penn track in East New York, while she stood in freezing temperatures that dipped to 9 degrees. Stewart was toasty in his car, waiting close by, and he'd drive by after she was dropped off, sex buyers who thought nothing of dropping off this kid back into the darkness and back into the cold after buying sex from her. But her pimp, Diamond Stewart, would drive by and collect the money from her. Now, her family was looking for her. She took off a couple of days before Christmas. As soon as the NYPD was on the case, they quickly found her. And the 30-year-old Diamond Stewart no longer gets to love bomb teenage girls online and lure them to New York for prostitution to make him money. He gets to enjoy the inside of a cell. But it doesn't always work this neatly. With New York's 5-year statute of limitations, even when kids are involved, guys like Diamond Stewart get away with severe human rights violations perpetrated on some of our youngest, our most vulnerable, our most needy individuals. Right now, they could very easily be in front of the Covenant House in Times Square looking for those vulnerable youth. They could be in front of the PATH Center for homeless families, recruiting. And as the senator said, we are facing a crisis situation now with tens of thousands of female migrants here whose benefits are running out, who are living in tent cities, and this is a priority for them and for all of us. It's a crime of the worst magnitude. It robs so many young women and girls of their right to their childhood, their right to live free of sexual exploitation, abuse, and violence. And it sends a message to society and to the men in our society that you can just buy consent. This is not the post-Me Too movement that we're looking for. It should be of the highest priority to the government to hold the perpetrators here accountable, and it should be the highest priority of government to prevent it. New York politicians love to describe New York as being a beacon of hope, a beacon of progress, a beacon of equality, but apparently not for girls and women who are sexually exploited on our streets and online. New York has one of the most restrictive timelines on prosecuting sex trafficking. It's time to change that. It's overdue. Last year, the Senate unanimously passed this bill. It was ready to be voted on in the Assembly. Everybody you're looking here on this stage worked to make that happen and to get it there. It did not make it. It was not a priority for the Assembly to actually vote on it. I believe when they get the opportunity to vote on it, it will pass unanimously as well as it did in the Senate. But we need the Senate leadership, we need Carl Hastie to just signal for the vote to be voted on. And we can move on, and the governor can sign it, and we can start protecting trafficking victims the way that they deserve to. So thank you so very much today for letting me speak on this important subject.
Thank you for those sobering and powerful words. We'll hear next from Melanie Thompson. All that we do here in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and I don't presume to speak for everyone, but I know it's true of everyone on stage, it's driven by the survivors. And so next we'll hear from Melanie Thompson.
Thank you, DA Bragg. Good morning. New York State has done so much in the last few decades to understand the complexities and nuances of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, the Me Too movement, marital rape, and other forms of gender-based violence. Why is it that when it comes to sex trafficking survivors, we don't extend the same courtesies? We have recognized that there are power imbalances in abusive marriages, and that just leaving is easier said than done. That a person may want to flee an abusive relationship, but could have a multitude of factors preventing them from doing so, such as fear or psychological coercion. That someone who was a victim of rape may take years to come forward due to the status of their mental health, and that those who may want to come forward on the record may not do so because of public shame, fear of not being believed, or even threats and intimidation. So what did we do, New York? We passed the Adult Survivors Act, extending that statute of limitations for sexual assault survivors. We've given them some cushion of time to come forward and take back some of the power in their lives, enough time to at least begin the process of processing. But when a person experiences all of those same horrors and has the added layer of being commodified at a price, we give them a 5-year statute of limitation. 5 years is the amount of time it takes a child to fully develop their gross motor skills. 5 years is how long it takes the average American to obtain their bachelor's degree. 5 years is how long it takes most college students to save $5,000. But for sex trafficking survivors, 5 years can be the amount of time it takes to recognize that you're even being trafficked. 5 years can be the amount of time it takes for your first trafficker to sell you off to your second one. It can take 5 years to break away from the physical, sexual, emotional, and even substance abuse that your trafficker has imposed and inflicted on you. And even another 5 after that to begin processing those traumas. Do you see why 5 years is not enough? Placing a 5-year statute of limitations on the crime of sex trafficking is telling survivors that we only have 5 years to get over trauma that can be crippling for life. It is inexcusable, and the longer our voices are ignored, the clearer it will be that the Assembly doesn't take this crime seriously and continues to contribute to the problem. My name is Melanie Thompson. I am a New York-based sex trafficking survivor who was urging all of us, New York State lawmakers, the Assembly, to pass Bill A 1940. Without it, we will continue to see an uptick in trafficking, more brazen pimps on the street, and so many vulnerable and marginalized people get sucked into this criminal enterprise for years without being able to do anything about it when they come out. We need to do more for sex trafficking survivors. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your courageous leadership. And I just want to note something you said, because we see it in our practice. You talked about, 5 years from one trafficker, and there's another trafficker. So in our START Act work, where we're looking back and voiding convictions, we see exactly that, right? We are voiding a conviction relating to one trafficker who had someone do something, they got a conviction for it, so we void that. But in talking to that survivor and learning, we find out about the prior 5 years. And that's what we can't prosecute. So thank you for I like the 5-year increments. We appreciate all that you're doing. We'll hear next from our Deputy Commissioner, Solani Sethi.
Thanks so much, DA Bragg, Assemblymember Dinowitz, Senator Clear, Melanie, Sonia, for all your words and your advocacy on this bill and on behalf of trafficking survivors in general. So my name is Solani Sethi. I'm from the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. And our office coordinates the city's response to all forms of gender-based violence, including human trafficking. So we collaborate closely with city agencies, with community-based organizations, with survivors to develop and implement policies and programs that increase access to supports for survivors. We also operate the 5 Family Justice Centers, which provide free, culturally and linguistically responsive services, legal and social services to all survivors of gender-based violence. So our work really sits at the intersection of survivor experiences and systemic responses, giving us a perspective on how many systems all too often fall short of providing survivors the remedies they need to access justice and unintentionally re-traumatize those they mean to help. This is especially true, as you've heard from everybody here, for those who suffer long-term trauma related to repeated experiences of victimization, like sex trafficking survivors, who cannot access existing legal remedies because they come forward too long after the abuse happens. And that's why I'm so excited, that the city is supporting this legislation and that we're all here to try and get this law passed this year. By eliminating the criminal statute of limitations for crimes related to sex trafficking and extending civil statutes, this legislation will meaningfully increase pathways to justice for trafficking survivors, supporting them as they deal with the impacts of the abuse that they've experienced. And to survivors, let me say that I know that this legislation on its own is not enough, right? It is the beginning. It is just one step to improving our systems to be more survivor-centered. But I know I speak for myself and my office, and I think I speak for all the people standing up here today and many others that aren't here when I say, we see you, we hear you, we believe you, and we will stand with you as we work together to make sure you have what you need to heal. Thank you.